Funny how you can live with someone for years and still be surprised when they hang themselves with the same rope you handed them as a wedding gift. I'd always said sarcasm was her first language and loyalty her last, but I never thought I'd catch her slipping quite so clumsily, leaving a half-eaten croissant on the counter with two neatly parallel bites taken from opposite sides. It wasn't the croissant itself that made my blood turn to ice. It was that she hated croissants, said the flakes got under her nails, and here it was, devoured with the greedy impatience of someone who hadn't waited for her husband to get home. I didn't scream, didn't accuse, didn't even blink. I just picked up the pastry, examined it like an archaeologist dusting off a bone, and placed it back down gently as if I were leaving a landmine untouched. The kitchen clock ticked behind me, each second slicing into the silence like a dull knife. And I just stood there, staring at the stupid pastry, feeling a curious detachment bubble up inside me, an almost giddy sort of horror at the absurdity of it all. If she were smarter, she would have at least cleaned up the evidence. But no, she had to leave it sitting there like a murder confession written in crumbs and butter. I heard the garage door were open a minute later, her car pulling in with that same lazy screech she never seemed to notice, and I wiped my hands calmly on the dish towel, schooling my face into the mask I would wear for the foreseeable future. She waltzed in, balancing a Target bag on her hip, humming some pop song under her breath like she hadn't just staged a domestic crime scene in our kitchen, and when her eyes flicked to the counter and froze, just for a heartbeat, I knew I'd caught her soul trying to climb out of her body and bolt for the door. She recovered fast, too fast, really, and launched into a rambling excuse about traffic and long lines, her voice pitching higher on the word crazy, which it always did when she was lying. But I just smiled, kissed her cheek, and asked her if she wanted me to warm up the croissant she picked up for me. The look she gave me, wide-eyed and feral, was all the confirmation I needed, though I played the part of the clueless, loving husband with Oscar-worthy devotion. That was the first break, the first little hairline fracture that spiderwebbed through the porcelain of our life together, and standing there with that buttery, traitorous croissant between us, I realized something she would take much longer to figure out. I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. No. I was going to stay right here, smiling and nodding and loving and forgiving, while inside me, the silent countdown had already begun. And when it reached 0, she wouldn't even have the dignity of a clean break, only the slow, grinding horror of a life quietly collapsing in on itself, while the man she thought she could fool watched it all with dead, unblinking eyes. We used to be one of those couples that made people nauseous at dinner parties, the kind who still held hands under the table and finished each other's sentences without sounding like idiots. And I wore that like armor, a silent badge of pride that said, "See? We made it." She used to light up when I walked into a room, not in any big dramatic way, but in the small things, the slight lift of her eyebrow, the way her body would unconsciously angle toward me like a sunflower to the sun, and for years I mistook that for permanence. For something I could bank my soul on. I didn't notice the cracks right away. Cracks never announce themselves, they just quietly grow while you're busy smiling. The first one came when she started taking personal days not for us, not for spontaneous trips or lazy Sundays, but just for herself, days she would spend out at coffee shops, museums, yoga classes she never invited me to, claiming she needed to. Recharge, a word that sounded mechanical and foreign in her mouth. Then there were the purchases, small things at first, barely noticeable, a new leather bag she insisted was on sale, a bracelet I'd never seen before. A second gym membership across town that didn't make any logistical sense but somehow became a necessity overnight. She still laughed at my jokes, but it was a second too late, like she had to think about it first. She still kissed me goodbye, but her lips would brush mine with the distracted precision of someone swiping their phone screen. I told myself it was stress, it was the season, it was hormones, it was anything but what it was, the slow, silent unfurling of a life that no longer had a place for me. She started throwing around therapy words like confetti at a funeral, boundaries, self-care, finding my own path, phrases that sounded noble in theory but came with an aftertaste of dismissal, as if our life together was suddenly a weight she needed to shed. Her phone, once left casually on the coffee table without a second thought, now lived glued to her side like a second skin, face down, silenced, guarded with a smile that dared me to question it. One night, while cleaning out her car because she didn't have time, I found a crumpled parking receipt from a restaurant across town, one she swore she hated because they overpriced everything dated the same night she told me she was at book club. And when I held it in my hand, staring at the smudged ink like it might confess to me, all I felt was a strange, hollow amusement. I didn't confront her. I didn't even bring it up. Instead, I tucked the receipt back where I found it, buried under half-empty water bottles and yoga mats, and drove the car back into the garage with a smile so wide it hurt my cheeks. Her social media, once an open window into the life we built, had gone dark to me, set to private, with the casual cruelty of someone shutting a door in your face without explanation. And when I asked if there was a glitch, she said, "Oh, it must be a setting I clicked by accident," laughing too hard, too long, like a sitcom actress who missed the punchline. Through it all, I kept playing my part, the supportive husband, the easygoing partner, because even as the evidence piled up around me like corpses on a battlefield, some stubborn, stupid part of me wanted to believe she was just lost, not malicious. I wanted to believe that the girl who once cried because she loved me too much was still buried under there somewhere, clawing her way back to the surface. But every time I reached for her, I got back an echo instead of an answer, a curated performance of love that rang hollow and mechanical, like she was mimicking the behaviors she thought a wife was supposed to perform, without any of the heart that once animated them. It was like loving a wax figure, beautiful, familiar, but utterly devoid of warmth, and as the days ticked by, the cracks became canyons, wide and gaping and impossible to ignore. Still, I said nothing. Still, I smiled. Still, I chose to believe. But deep down, a tiny voice, no louder than a whisper, had already begun to speak, and it was saying something I could no longer deny. The woman I loved was gone, and the stranger wearing her skin didn't even have the decency to bury her properly. There's a particular kind of silence that falls when you realize the person you loved is not just drifting away but actively dismantling the life you built together, and it doesn't come with fireworks or dramatic music, just a soft, clinical click. Like a switch being flipped deep inside your chest. It was a Thursday, forgettable in every other way, except that I got home earlier than planned, a rare thing, and decided to wait for her instead of announcing my arrival, because by then, my instincts were sharper than they had any right to be. I moved through the house with the quiet of a predator stalking prey, no malice, just mechanical observation, and when I heard her voice through the thin door of the bathroom, soft and sugary in a way she hadn't spoken to me in months, I felt something slow and permanent lock into place inside my mind. I stood there, perfectly still, listening to her giggle, a sound that once belonged to me, and murmur into the phone, her words low but unmistakably intimate, things like, "I can't stop thinking about last night," and "You're so bad," punctuated by a laugh that didn't sound like her at all anymore, a new laugh, manufactured for someone else's benefit. She had locked the door behind her, an unnecessary detail that served as the final nail in a coffin I hadn't even realized she was building. I didn't barge in. I didn't scream accusations through the door. I just stood there, absorbing it, committing every syllable to memory with the precision of a surgeon cataloging a terminal diagnosis. When she finally hung up and emerged, towel around her hair like some goddess of innocence, she had the audacity to smile at me, to ask how my day was, and it took everything I had not to smile back in that moment, not because I still loved her, but because I realized, with the clarity of a man seeing through glass for the first time, that I didn't feel anything for her anymore at all. Not anger. Not sadness. Nothing but cold, calculating emptiness. The kind of void that didn't crave revenge for satisfaction but simply understood, on a fundamental level, that destruction was no longer optional, it was inevitable. She babbled about errands she had to run, avoiding eye contact just slightly, and I nodded, making a note of the new chip in her carefully painted mask. I watched the way she tied her shoes too quickly, the way her hands trembled just a bit when she grabbed her keys, and I knew then that she wasn't just cheating on me, she was slipping, unraveling, losing control of the narrative she thought she had mastered. And me? I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of a confrontation, of a scene she could twist into some story about my jealousy or insecurity. No, I would let her keep talking, keep smiling, keep digging her grave one sweet little lie at a time, until the weight of it all finally crushed her under its own bloated corpse. I watched her leave without saying goodbye, the screen door slamming behind her like a gunshot, and as her taillights disappeared down the street, I simply turned off the porch light and walked back inside, every step echoing in the hollow cathedral of a marriage that had just, in a few whispered words through a bathroom door, died a silent, bloodless death. I poured myself a drink, sat down at the kitchen table, and pulled out a piece of scrap paper, not to write a note or a confession, but to start my list, the one I would follow with surgical precision in the weeks to come. Step by step, smile by smile, kiss by kiss. until the day would arrive when she would beg for the life she so casually threw away, and I would be there, not to grant mercy, but to watch her drown in the beautiful disaster she created, too blind and arrogant to see it coming. And in that moment, sitting alone under the dim kitchen light with the smell of her fake lavender shampoo still hanging in the air, I realized something with chilling certainty. She had taught me how to kill something without ever raising my voice. And I was a very good student. It's a strange thing, watching the woman you married unravel her own life while smiling sweetly at you across the dinner table, and it's even stranger when you realize you don't feel the urge to stop her, you feel the urge to sharpen the knife she's swinging at her own throat. I didn't rage, didn't accuse, didn't even let my gaze linger too long when she spun another flimsy lie. I simply leaned back into the shadows of our home, becoming a silent observer. A man fading into the wallpaper of her life while taking notes with the cold precision of a biologist studying a doomed specimen. The first move was simple. I set a small, invisible trap by offering to order lunch to her office, just because, timing it for a day she claimed she'd be slammed with meetings. And when she texted back 2 hours later with some excuse about a broken elevator and no cell service, I already knew from the delivery app that the receptionist had turned away the courier because no one by that name worked there anymore. That was the first clean confirmation, not suspicion, not theory, but evidence, and I didn't confront her, didn't even flinch when she came home later all smiles and stress about her crazy busy day. Just kissed her forehead and listened with a patience I didn't feel. I started combing through our joint bank statements at night, lying in bed beside her while she scrolled mindlessly through her phone, under the pretense of checking our mortgage status, and what I found was laughably clumsy, repeated charges at a boutique hotel across town. Always on days she had late meetings or girls' nights, a hotel we had never stepped foot into together. Still, I said nothing. I created a fake profile online, not to flirt or catfish her, but to quietly map out her digital world, and within 3 days, her private social media was accessible again, wide open to strangers but locked to me, and there, hidden among the endless hashtags about self-care and new beginnings, were the real gems, pictures too carefully cropped to show who was sitting beside her, captions about adventures and magic moments that didn't include me, didn't even pretend to. I didn't need to follow her, didn't need to break into her phone. All I had to do was follow her best friend, the loud one, the one who never could resist posting every cocktail, every selfie, every blurred figure in the background, and there, buried under a barrage of birthday shots and ladies' nights, I caught him. A man. Always the same one. Always just out of focus, but never completely hidden. I studied the timestamps, the check-ins, cross-referenced them with her excuses, her increasingly elaborate stories, and found that the lies didn't just fit. They formed a lattice, a sick little structure she built to climb out of the life we had built together. I began planting small, calculated questions at dinner, harmless ones at first. How's Beth doing? Haven't heard about her in a while, or weren't you supposed to have a meeting downtown today? And every time, without fail, she stumbled just slightly, her eyes darting to the side, her hands twitching with the need to either flee or fabricate, and I cataloged every twitch, every hesitation, with clinical precision. I learned her tells faster than I had ever learned anything in my life, and the more I saw, the less I recognized the woman sitting across from me. She thought she was clever, that she was managing it all, spinning plates in the air while I sat oblivious, but I was already behind the curtain, already pulling the strings of a stage she didn't even know existed. One night, I left my phone unlocked and casually opened to a conversation with a fake female coworker I had invented, complete with light, teasing messages about a project we were working late on, and sure enough, the next morning, she was cold, stiff. Probing without directly asking, suspicion flickering in her eyes like a dying match. But I just smiled, kissed her on the cheek, and said I had an early start at the office. She didn't realize it then, but she was already trapped, caught in a game she thought she had been orchestrating, oblivious to the fact that every move she made now only tightened the noose around her own neck. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I was something far more dangerous, patient, because it wasn't enough to catch her. No, I wanted her to feel it, to realize, too late, that the man she thought was her safety net had become the architect of her downfall, and by the time she noticed the cracks in her perfect little world, the foundation would already be ash beneath her feet. It was her idea to have a small gathering at her favorite wine bar to celebrate her recent promotion, the same promotion she had been lying about for weeks, pretending to be busy with meetings and projects that never existed. And I agreed with a smile so genuine she never once questioned it. Because the thing about lies is that they breed arrogance in the weak, and she had grown drunk on the fantasy that she was smarter than the man who watched her build it. The room was cozy, dimly lit with fairy lights and filled with just enough people to make the air hum with noise, but not enough to offer her an escape when it all came crashing down. I waited until dessert, until she was 2 glasses of wine deep and laughing too loudly at something her best friend said, before I slipped the small, square envelope onto the table between her and her untouched slice of tiramisu. She frowned, confused, probably thinking it was some cheesy love letter or a congratulatory card, and with a theatrical flourish that would have impressed even the most jaded audience, I watched her peel it open and freeze. Inside were 3 photographs, printed clean and clear, one of her hand, unmistakably hers with the small scar on her knuckle, clutching a cheap hotel room key, one of her in a parking lot, wrapped in the arms of a man who was definitely not me, and one, the final nail, of her sitting in a restaurant, laughing across the table at the same man, a moment she had once reserved only for me. For a second, she didn't move, didn't breathe, and then she blinked, the way someone might when waking from a nightmare they don't want to accept, and with a voice so soft it barely carried over the clinking glasses, she whispered, "It's not what you think." I said nothing. I just tilted my head slightly, a silent invitation for her to continue digging her own grave. She swallowed hard, pushing the photos together as if proximity would somehow make them disappear, and stumbled into phase 2, justification. "We were just talking," she said, her hands trembling as they brushed the edges of the evidence. "I was feeling isolated. You were so busy lately. I needed someone to listen." The words tumbled out like pennies dropped into a wishing well, clinking, hollow, desperate, and I let her speak until the room around us seemed to lean in, the conversations at neighboring tables dulling into a curious buzz. Then came the inevitable pivot to blame, the part where her voice sharpened and her spine straightened just slightly, as if anger might armor her against the reality bleeding out between us. "You were never there," she said, her cheeks flushing with the first sting of real fear masked as rage. "You stopped paying attention to me. What did you expect? I'm only human." I smiled then, just a small, sad thing, and leaned forward until she had no choice but to meet my eyes, those same eyes she once claimed made her feel safe, and I said, calmly, surgically, "I didn't expect anything less than what you've become." The slap of those words was louder than any raised voice could have been, and for a heartbeat she flinched like I had physically struck her, her mouth working silently before she found her footing again, this time in mockery. She laughed, short and cruel, and leaned back in her chair like a queen on a crumbling throne, tossing her hair over one shoulder with a scoff. "You're pathetic," she hissed under her breath, thinking she had the upper hand because the evidence was real but the consequences hadn't hit her yet, because she still lived under the illusion that I loved her enough to forgive what she had done. But even as she spat venom across the table, I watched the fear slip into her eyes, quiet and trembling, a mouse realizing the cat wasn't playing anymore. I didn't raise my voice, didn't call her names, didn't even look angry. I simply sat there, letting the silence grow, letting it wrap around her like a noose, and when I finally spoke again, my voice was low, unshakable, final. "You buried yourself the day you thought you were smarter than me," I said, every word delivered with the careful precision of a scalpel carving away the last shreds of her dignity. "You're just too arrogant to know you're already dead." Her face crumpled then, not into tears, no, that would have been too honest, but into a twisted mask of hatred and fear, a woman who finally understood she had lost everything but was too proud to admit it. Around us, the party carried on, oblivious, the clink of wine glasses and polite laughter a sickening contrast to the war unfolding in the space between us, and I sat there, composed, silent, a man who had already won but wasn't finished yet. I didn't get up. I didn't storm out. I simply sat, the photos still lying between us like corpses at a funeral, and waited, the tension thick and choking in the air, knowing the real devastation was still to come, and she would feel every second of it. It was almost beautiful, in a grotesque way, how quickly the mask slipped once she realized I wasn't going to shout, wasn't going to argue, wasn't going to crawl through the shards of the life she had shattered to beg her for answers she wasn't worthy to give. She started slow at first, still clinging to the desperate hope that the right combination of words might turn the tide, her voice trembling as she whispered about mistakes, about feeling neglected, about needing someone to see her again. But when I just sat there, cold and silent, she shifted gears with the reckless panic of a drowning woman trying to climb onto a sinking ship. "You smothered me." She spat suddenly, loud enough that a few heads turned in the wine bar, but I didn't flinch, didn't look away, just tilted my head slightly, studying her the way you might watch a trapped animal gnaw its own leg off. She waited for a reaction, any reaction, but when none came, she lunged again, sharper, nastier, more desperate. "You were boring," she sneered, baring her teeth in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You never pushed yourself. You never made me feel alive. You think any woman would want to rot away next to a man like you." The words were meant to cut, but they skated harmlessly off the surface of my indifference, and when I finally spoke, it was with the slow, deliberate cruelty of a man dismantling a bomb wire by wire. "Then why did you chain yourself to me for so long?" I asked, my voice low, almost curious, and the flush of rage that crept up her neck told me she had no good answer. She stumbled, regrouped, lashed out again, her voice rising in a shrill, panicked rhythm. "This wouldn't have happened if you were a real man," she hissed, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, trembling not from anger but from fear, because she could feel it now, the absolute, impenetrable wall between us. The undeniable truth that she no longer had a single weapon that could hurt me. I smiled then, just a flicker of amusement in an otherwise unreadable face, and said, "A real man doesn't waste his strength on someone so small." The words hit harder than any slap, and I saw it in the way her shoulders hunched in on themselves, the way her mouth worked uselessly before she bit down on whatever bile she had been about to spit. She tried again, desperate now, shifting tactics with the frantic energy of someone realizing the battlefield was burning beneath her feet. She cried, tears streaming down her face in perfect streaks. The same tears she once used to soften my anger during small arguments, the same tears that once made me drop every defense, but now, they were just wet lies sliding down a face I didn't recognize. "I loved you," she whispered, voice cracking, reaching across the table like she could physically pull me back into the orbit she had destroyed, but I didn't move, didn't offer her the dignity of a recoil. I just stared at her, the way you might stare at a ruined painting, acknowledging the fragments of beauty without mourning the loss. "You loved yourself," I corrected softly, each syllable sliding in under her skin like a scalpel. "I was just a mirror you liked to look into." She recoiled as if slapped, gasping like she couldn't catch her breath, but I didn't flinch, didn't lean forward, didn't offer a hand or a word of comfort. I watched her try to rebuild her composure, slapping on smiles like patches over bullet holes, throwing out promises and apologies and accusations in equal measure, a chaotic whirlwind of manipulation that once might have confused me, angered me, broken me. But now, it just bored me. I watched her wear herself down, watched her tremble and shriek and plead and blame, a woman drowning in a storm she created, and the more she screamed, the quieter I became, until the space between us was so vast, so cold, that she could have shouted herself hoarse and still never reached me. She hurled one final insult across the table, something about how I would die alone, unloved, forgotten, and I just smiled, slow and small, and replied, "Better alone than betrayed." And with that, the last piece of her armor crumbled, and for the first time since I laid those photographs on the table, she truly saw it, the end. Not with violence, not with spectacle, but with a quiet, brutal certainty that nothing she said or did could ever undo what she had done, and that I, the man she thought would chase and cry and beg, was already gone. A ghost who had sat silently through her entire performance and judged it unworthy of even a final word. Around us, the world continued, wine glasses clinking, muted laughter floating through the air, but between us, there was only silence, a silence louder and more devastating than any shouting match could have ever been, and she sat there, broken, desperate, alone, while I watched, perfectly still, perfectly calm, waiting for the final act she hadn't even realized had already begun. Revenge, if it is to mean anything, must be meticulous, a symphony played in silence, and I had been composing mine from the moment I heard her laughter behind that bathroom door. Now it was time to conduct the final performance. And every note had to be perfect. I began with the obvious, gathering the evidence, not the slapdash, emotional kind that looks desperate in court, but clean, chronological files, bank statements tracing hotel payments, screenshots of social media posts she thought were private, photographs from multiple sources showing her hand in another man's, and most devastating of all, the innocuous GPS history from our shared car account showing her at addresses she swore she had never visited. I backed everything up threefold: cloud storage, external drives, hard copies, each organized with a precision that would make a prosecutor weep tears of gratitude, not because I needed them immediately, but because this wasn't a sprint, It was a siege. Next, I quietly severed financial ties without a single warning. Credit cards she depended on were canceled. Joint accounts were frozen pending separation proceedings. Utilities under my name were scheduled for cancellation or transfer. And the second vehicle she used was reclaimed one night while she slept, the spare key slipping easily into my pocket as I drove it to a friend's secure garage. I met with a lawyer, not one of those flashy billboard types she would expect me to stumble into, but a specialist, quiet, lethal, and extremely thorough, who began preparing the divorce petition and financial disclosures with a speed that almost seemed malicious, though he assured me it was simply due diligence. While she played the victim to her friends and waxed poetic online about healing journeys and personal growth, I compiled a neatly summarized portfolio of her infidelity, her financial recklessness, and her abandonment of marital responsibilities, carefully formatted for the inevitable day when mutual friends, and more importantly, her parents, would be shown exactly the kind of woman their darling daughter had become. I sent the file to her parents first, not with anger, not with accusations, but with a short, clinical email. I thought you should have the full context before hearing anything from her. No dramatics, no accusations, just undeniable truth laid bare like a corpse under a forensic light. I arranged to meet with HR at her company, not as a vengeful husband but as a concerned spouse. I brought them evidence suggesting that their employee had been misusing company time and resources for personal affairs, highlighting how her frequent meetings coincided suspiciously with non-business-related excursions. I never demanded she be fired. Oh no, that would have been too crude. Instead, I simply planted seeds of doubt, seeds that grew quickly in the fertile soil of corporate liability concerns. Every move I made was timed to hit in sequence, like a series of controlled demolitions, each blast weakening the structure before the final collapse. I made sure that when the divorce papers were served, they coincided with the notification that she would no longer have access to the apartment we shared. Her key fob was disabled the same day. Her belongings boxed and placed in storage she could access only after signing release forms waiving any claim to property still under my name. The apartment lease was in my name alone, another small, boring detail she had forgotten over the years, and within hours of her being locked out, I had the locks changed, the furniture rearranged, the traces of her existence scrubbed clean like the aftermath of a crime scene. She didn't even realize she was being boxed in until it was far too late. She still moved through the days thinking she had time to fix things, to manipulate the narrative, but I had already tightened every noose, cut off every escape route, and the walls were closing in faster than her lies could outrun them. Friends who once adored her now distanced themselves, not because I begged them to, but because I simply showed them who she had become, letting the facts do the heavy lifting while I remained quiet and composed. She would find herself standing in the ruins of the life she thought she could manipulate and cheat her way through, surrounded by the wreckage of relationships she assumed were bulletproof, financial security she took for granted, and a career she had barely begun to build before I pulled out the foundation with a surgeon's grace. There were no screaming matches, no drunken late-night rants, no pathetic displays of wounded masculinity, only the cold, relentless march of a man who had decided to burn the bridge after crossing it and never look back. And through it all, she never once saw the final move coming, because people like her never believe the quiet ones are dangerous, until they realize they've been dead men walking since the first moment they were caught. It was almost poetic, how easily everything fell into place once the first domino tipped, and I chose the annual summer barbecue her family hosted, the event she used to beg me to attend, insisting it was important to show we're strong together, as the stage for her final, public unmasking. The sun was bright, the laughter was loud, and the scent of grilled meat floated through the air like incense at a sacrificial altar, and I played my part perfectly, smiling politely, shaking hands, nodding at her relatives who had no idea the ground was about to be ripped out from under their daughter's feet. She clung to my arm at first, a little tighter than usual, her laugh a little too loud, a little too brittle, because somewhere deep inside she must have known, must have felt the air around her shifting in ways she couldn't name yet. The reveal was simple, elegant, irreversible, a group text message I had prepared days earlier, addressed to her parents, her siblings, her closest friends, containing nothing more than a short, devastating sentence and a neatly organized folder of evidence. Before you toast to family and love, you deserve to know the truth about her name. I timed it perfectly, hitting send, just as her father raised his glass to give the opening speech, his words dying mid-sentence as phones buzzed and heads bent low, reading, scrolling, gasping. She noticed first, the wave of silence rolling outward like a shockwave, and her grip tightened on my arm for a heartbeat before she pulled away, scanning the faces now turning toward her, confused, angry, betrayed. She tried to laugh it off at first, tossing her hair over her shoulder, saying, "What's wrong? Did someone post an embarrassing old photo?" But her voice cracked on the last word, betraying her. Her mother was the first to speak, her voice shaking with something between rage and heartbreak, asking quietly, "Is it true?" And when her name stammered, blinking rapidly, the mask she wore so easily for so long began to fracture. "It's not what you think," she said, the same tired lie she had once whispered to me, but it collapsed under the weight of 100 eyes burning into her. Her brother held up his phone, displaying the photos, her, tangled in another man's arms, and said coldly, "You disgust me," before walking away without another word. She spun, desperate now, trying to find a friendly face, but they had all turned to stone, and even her so-called best friend, the one she had once shared every secret with, stood with folded arms beside me, shaking her head in silent judgment. She lurched toward me then, as if proximity to the man she betrayed would somehow save her, but I didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared at her with the same quiet, unblinking calm I had perfected over weeks of preparation. Her lover, the man she had risked everything for, wasn't even there, because when I had sent the same file to him 2 nights earlier, accompanied by screenshots of her laughing at how easily he was manipulated, how stupid he was to think she would ever leave her comfortable life for him, he had blocked her, vanished, erased himself from her world without a backward glance. She was alone, utterly and visibly alone, and still she fought. Still she tried to claw her way back to some semblance of dignity, forcing a brittle smile and saying, "This is all fake. He's trying to ruin me. You know how controlling he was." But the words landed with a dull thud, too little, too late, and no one was buying tickets to her final act. Her father, a man who once toasted me as the son he never had, set his glass down so gently it barely made a sound and said, "You've embarrassed yourself enough," turning his back on her with the finality of a coffin lid closing. Her breathing hitched, her chest heaving as she looked around the yard at the faces that once lit up when she entered, now blank, cold, accusing, and in that moment she locked eyes with me, and that was when she broke. Because I wasn't yelling. I wasn't storming out. I wasn't weeping or demanding explanations. I was just there, still, steady, unmovable, the living proof that she had lost something she could never get back. The mask slipped completely then, the tears streaming down her face no longer manipulative but raw and ugly, the sobs ripping out of her throat as she stumbled, almost tripping over her own feet, trying to find somewhere, anywhere, to escape the judgment pressing in on her from every direction. I watched her crumble without lifting a finger, watched her humiliate herself with hysterical excuses, watched her family, her friends, everyone she had once deceived, slowly walk away one by one until she was left standing in the center of the lawn, utterly alone, broken under the weight of the truth she could no longer deny or spin or run from. And I stayed. I didn't move. I didn't leave. I stood there, calm, composed, arms folded, watching her fall apart piece by piece, letting her see that I was still here, not as her husband, not as her victim, but as the man who had turned her lies into her executioner, and who would never have to raise his voice to make her remember this moment for the rest of her miserable life. The thing about pressure is that it can only build for so long before it detonates, and it wasn't enough for her to be exposed quietly. She needed to feel the collapse, to hear the echo of her own downfall in the gasps and the silence around her. So when she came stumbling toward me across the lawn, sobbing, pleading, clawing at the air between us, I didn't step back. I stood firm, and when she screamed, "You're ruining my life," it cracked the fragile piece into chaos. Her parents froze mid-step, his siblings stiffened with sharp, disbelieving expressions, her so-called friends clustered into a nervous, whispering knot, and when she grabbed my shirt, yanking at it like a drowning woman grasping at driftwood, I finally let the words that had been burning inside me ignite. "No," I said, my voice carrying clean and sharp across the yard, slicing through the buzz of whispers. "You ruined your life the moment you decided loyalty was optional." She stumbled back as if struck, but the crowd was watching now, eyes wide, phones slipping into hands with quiet clicks as people started recording, knowing instinctively that they were witnessing the final explosion of something rotten. "You were never loyal," she shrieked, red-faced and wild, the girl next door smile twisted into something feral. "You just wanted a pet, someone to stay in your shadow while you played king of nothing." Gasps rippled through the onlookers, her parents recoiling in visible horror. But I didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Better a king of nothing, I shot back, voice cold and lethal, than a queen of betrayal. She whirled toward her mother then, begging, hands outstretched, voice cracking under the weight of desperation. Mom, he's making it sound worse than it is. You know how controlling he's always been. You know. But her mother just shook her head slowly, tears tracking down her face, as her father crossed his arms and looked at me with a grim nod that said everything without a word needing to be spoken. It should have ended there, but no, she wasn't done yet. She spotted him then, the man she threw her marriage away for, hovering awkwardly near the back of the crowd, pale and shifty-eyed, trying to melt into the scenery. Tell them, she shrieked, pointing a trembling hand at him. Tell them it wasn't serious. Tell them it didn't mean anything. But he didn't move. He didn't even look at her. He just turned and walked away without a word, without a glance back, leaving her screaming his name, her voice shattering into broken sobs that only made the scene uglier. See, she cried, spinning back toward me, hair wild, makeup streaking down her face like a horror show. They all abandon you in the end. You think you're better than me? You're pathetic. The words were meant to cut, but the crowd saw the desperation for what it was, and so did I. I stepped forward, close enough that she had no choice but to meet my gaze, and said, low enough that only she and those closest could hear, but sharp enough that it would ring in her ears for years. The only thing pathetic here is watching you try to blame everyone but the one person responsible, yourself. She staggered back as if hit, but the murmurs had already begun, the disbelieving headshakes, the judgment settling in heavy around her shoulders like a lead cloak she would never be able to shrug off. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but I cut her off, voice rising just enough to command the full attention of the gathering. You threw away a man who loved you, who trusted you, who would have fought the world for you, I said, each word delivered with brutal clarity. And for what? A few cheap thrills and a handful of lies you told yourself to make the guilt go down easier. She shook her head violently, mouthing denials, but the weight of truth pressed her down until she dropped into a crouch on the grass, sobbing uncontrollably, the image of what she once was disintegrating in real time for everyone to see. People pulled back, some openly filming, others whispering with wide eyes, and the more she cried, the more isolated she became, until she was nothing but a broken heap surrounded by the silent, cold judgment of the people she once thought she could fool forever. And I stood there, perfectly still, perfectly calm, my heart hammering with the satisfaction of finality, of justice served raw and unmerciful. I didn't offer her a hand. I didn't offer her pity. I let her drown in the consequences she built herself, every tear, every gasp, every humiliating second searing itself into the memory of everyone present. When it was finally clear she would never recover from this moment, not in their eyes, not in mine, I turned, nodded politely to her stunned parents, and walked away through the center of the gathering, my dignity intact, the quiet storm of my revenge complete. And behind me, she was left to crumble into dust. In the months that followed, her life crumbled faster than even I had anticipated, like watching a house of cards collapse under the first breath of truth. It started with the polite email from her company, citing a reevaluation of priorities and a need for brand integrity, a euphemism so thin you could see the shame bleeding through it. And within a week, she was unemployed, her work laptop deactivated, her access revoked, her name whispered in hallways she would never walk again. Her so-called friends, the ones who toasted her growth and independence, vanished like smoke the moment the screenshots surfaced, and her social media, once a curated highlight reel of fake smiles and inspirational quotes, became a graveyard of posts with 0 likes and no comments, every follower quietly slipping away into the night without so much as a goodbye. The same streets where she used to strut like a queen became narrow alleys of shame. Store clerks turned their backs, old neighbors crossed the street, even the baristas at the cafe she once frequented looked through her like she didn't exist. And when the landlord sent her the termination notice for late payments, she packed what little pride she had left into the back of a battered sedan and disappeared to some no-name town 3 hours away, where no one knew her story yet. Her lover, the grand prize she threw everything away for, blocked her number within days of the fallout, erasing her with the same indifference she once tried to inflict on me, and in the wreckage of everything she had sacrificed for a handful of stolen moments. She found only silence, indifference, and a haunting emptiness she could no longer pretend didn't exist. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she took a job waiting tables at some roadside diner, the kind that doesn't ask too many questions if you show up on time and don't steal from the till, and I almost felt sorry for her, almost. But pity is a luxury you don't offer to someone who lit the match and danced in the flames as everything you built together burned to ash. Months later, late one night when the world was quiet and clean, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize at first, but the tone was unmistakable. I still love you. I made a mistake. Please talk to me. I stared at the words for a long moment, the ghost of a life I no longer cared about flickering weakly in the screen's cold light, and then, without hesitation, I typed a single line. Strange. I don't even remember your name anymore. I hit send, set the phone down, and never looked back. She showed up once after that, knocking on the door of the new home I had built without her, standing on the porch looking like a shell of the woman I had once known, hair limp, clothes wrinkled. Makeup smeared not from vanity, but from futile attempts to cover the cracks that no foundation could hide, and when I opened the door, I didn't say a word. She tried to speak, stammering something about forgiveness, about starting over, her voice thick with tears, her hands shaking with the desperate tremor of someone who had run out of second chances, but I simply looked at her, really looked, and saw nothing worth saving. Not love. Not even hate. Just a stranger standing where a mistake used to be. I closed the door slowly, deliberately, leaving her on the other side with all the coldness and finality she had earned, and as the latch clicked into place, it wasn't anger that filled me. It was peace, pure and absolute. The kind you only find once you've walked through fire and left the ashes behind you. Some choices you don't get to undo, some bridges you don't get to rebuild, and some people, once gone, stay gone. For good. Thank you for listening to my story today. I hope you found it as cathartic to hear as it was to live. Where are you listening from? Did you enjoy it? I'd love to know.